Hello friends, I wanted to give you a quick video about what to look for when you're analyzing illustration. In our assigned reading, it does have some tips for you, but some things I'd like to add. When you're looking at illustrations, especially in picture books, but also chapter books and graphic art or graphic novels now, you'll be looking at a few things. Number one, the medium that was used by the illustrator. Number two, the technique that they used. And I forgot to fill in the blank here, but there's all sorts of techniques that can be used by illustrators when they're doing things. Some people, like Kadir Nelson, paints on a huge mural and then it's shrunk down. Other people do layering. Some people use just the medium, pen to paper, paint brush to paper, paintbrush to canvas. So whatever technique they use, and that might require a little bit of research on your part. What kind of lines were used in the illustration, the colors. This part wasn't mentioned in our assigned reading, required reading, but it talked about, I have learned in the past a little bit about how they choose the font for the text and the size of the text and the placement of the text on the page, as well as where the pictures will go. So if it's the climax of a story in a picture book, it's usually a full spread across 2 pages with limited white space. If it's a simpler text for younger readers, you'll see a lot more white space around the text. So limited words, lots of white space around it. Sometimes if the words are falling, or it almost looks like poetry where they would put one word and then the next line would be another word and the next line another word, that might be on purpose so that the words are showing action. Also, I went to a really interesting lecture about how illustrators consider the turn of the page, and when a reader turns the page, what that means to the reader. And sometimes illustrators use the turning of the page to help time move along or to help the sequence of a story, or they consider that middle part of a book, that middle section, the crease of the book binding. They really consider that crease and what it means to the story and what it means to the reader, and the turning of the page means something to the illustrator. And that might be something to think about when you're reading some of the picture books, what the turning of the page is meant to do. And finally, how do the illustrators artwork, how does it set the tone for the story, and what kind of feelings does it evoke? So I wanted to show you just a few examples. This is a book I really love. I'd recommend buying it. It was published by the Reading is Fundamental organization with a foreword by Leonard Marcus. And in here, many different illustrators and authors were asked to name a book that influenced them early in their childhood and then how it influences their artwork now. Patricia Polacco was one of the people in the book, and she was influenced by Horton Hatch's The Egg by Dr. Seuss, right over here. And in the text of this book, it describes how she was really affected early on in her career with that, and then some of her artwork now you can see the influence of that book, and here's the reader reading the actual book that influenced her. Chris Rashka, he has done many different books. He was influenced by a book from Denmark, and if you get this book and read it, you can read how some of those international illustrators really affected his development as an artist. And you can see that he uses a lot of harsh lines and dark colors to show action and some intense suspense. Paul O. Zielinski, he has written a lot of fairy tale type books. Rapunzel is one of his most popular ones, and he was influenced by some The Cold Kitten. It was an earlier published book that's out of print now, and you can see in his artwork vibrant use of color, and he likes to have a sort of balance to his page, so you'll see blue balanced in all of the corners of his pages. And he also likes to go outside of the page. So on this particular illustration, it's very typical in most of his books. There will be some sort of structure, and then his artwork will fall out of it. Another illustrator you've probably heard of is David Shannon. He writes his own stories, but he also illustrates for others. Here are two of his popular books that he has illustrated, but he didn't write. In fact, he's kind of mad that he didn't write these books because he loves the topic so much that he kicks himself that he didn't think of it first. How I Became a Pirate is first, and the sequel is Pirates Don't Change Diapers. And his illustrative style uses rich color, but also a lot of detail. I wanted to show you this page because, well, actually, let me pause this and segue into a little bit from my blog. 1 second. Okay, I just hopped over to my blog for a minute because I wanted to show you, I went to a conference where David Shannon was a speaker, and so I got to meet him and learn from him for a while. This is the Provo City Library in Utah. We call it Hogwarts around our house because it's a very old building that has been restored, and it just kind of looks like Hogwarts to my kids. So here's David Shannon that I met. He was very entertaining as a speaker. He likes to tell a lot of stories. He was influenced a lot by Rosemary Wells, who wrote Max and Ruby, if you've ever seen that show. So some of the books that he's written are the No David type books. Here's one of them. He often got in trouble as a child, so he likes to write a lot of troublemaker stories or rascal archetypes in his stories. Here's another one about Christmas. And one of the things that I liked about him, he talked about his dog Fergus. And if you ever read David Shannon's books, he always has a white dog in all of his stories, and that's his own dog, Fergus. There's actually a book called Fergus, but it's something that you can look for in all his work. No David's one of his most popular books. It has very little text, but it has great illustrations with vibrant colors. Another of his books, again with the David character, and of course it is supposed to be autobiographical. It's supposed to be him as a child. And he talked a lot in his presentation about the teeth and how people respond very differently to David's teeth on these books, but he thinks it really shows the character, David in the stories, as being atypical. So he keeps it like that. He also wrote A Bad Case of Stripes. And when he goes on school visits, he likes to read this one to the students and talk about how they feel when they're sick, because that's something every child can relate to. He wrote Duck on a Bike. All of these are usually published by Scholastic. That's his publishing house that he usually works with. And Alice the Fairy. And Alice with the Fairy was written for his own daughter. Here's Fergus, his dog, and he has this whole book devoted to him, but in every story you'll find Fergus somewhere in the story. And then, like I was mentioning before, the How I Became a Pirate. The thing about this story that's interesting is he drew the page that I'll show you in a second with all the pirates, and because he had added so much detail and it took so long, he decided to name each one. And so after the presentation, I went up to him and I said, please tell me what you named the pirates. And so if you look right here, he wrote down in my writer's journal that I had in my hand what he named the pirates: Braidbird, Laffy, Crook, Jean, Badir, Gilly, Blurt. And then he could not remember the last pirate's name, and it bothered him the whole rest of the day. So I'll never know the final pirate's name. This was one of his latest published books, Too Many Toys, and he decided to write that after he stepped on a Lego at his house, and the pain that it brought to him gave him the creative juices to write this story. And here's another one that he teamed up with John Sheska to write. And this was a great one too, about Christmas, how David was told no, 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 and then in the end he was told yes. So back to the pirates. Here's the pirate page, and like I was mentioning before, this is a double spread page. Here's the crease in the book, so this is the climax of the story, because it's about how the child became the pirate, and David Shannon, the illustrator, named all of these pirates, and he couldn't remember this guy. So I just love David Shannon. I had to throw in a little bit of information about him because he is a great illustrator and a great person, and I enjoyed meeting him. So I adjusted the frame here to continue. We're almost done with this, but I wanted to show how some illustrations in children's literature, they get a bad rap. A lot of people think, oh, it's just books for children, but if you really start to learn about the illustration and the illustrators behind children's literature, they are usually very, very talented artists. This is one of my favorites, P.J. Lynch. Every picture in this book, When Jessie Came Across the Sea, looks like a work of art to me that I would have framed and put somewhere. It's just beautiful, beautiful artwork. Each page is just a painting, I think. Here's another page from that book, and that book is about immigrants. Same book, When Jessie Came Across the Sea. Another book that is usually recognized for its illustration is The Dance, illustrated by Jonathan Linton. And in this book, I always like to read the author's note because it gives a little insight. And this book was, there was a girl who was posing for this book who died in an accident, and he continued on to write and illustrate the book in her honor, in her memory. And so every illustration in here is definitely sentimental. And you cannot talk about illustrators without talking about Chris Van Allsburg, which we've talked about already. He likes to use darker colors, darker tones, and blurred paint lines so that there's a mystical, dreamlike quality. Here's some of his most famous pages. Even his Christmas book, The Polar Express, was known to be a dark Christmas book, but it's beloved. Another illustrator who's very popular is Eric Carle, who writes his own text as well, but he's known to be an illustrator, and his technique is to use collage. So I've heard him speak before, and he paints giant paper in a variety of colors, and he cuts them all up and he puts them on top of each other in a collage fashion to make his illustrations. And so this particular seahorse probably is lots of different cut up colors of papers that he does, and then each of these is a cut, a cut, a cut, a cut, and each of these tiny things too. So his artist workshop, he showed me a picture, is mostly on the floor where he lays out all of his big pages of paint. And you can't talk about The Hungry Caterpillar without talking about the manipulative pages within. The pages are shorter and longer, and they also have holes throughout it. So this book is usually a little bit more money to spend, to buy, because it's got some manipulative work on the pages. This seahorse book also has a color transparency overlay where you can take the seaweed and change it to the other side and lift it. So usually that increases the amount of money that you'd have to buy the book for. And to illustrate the double spread, this is the climax of the story, and so the center butterfly is just to the right of the crease, and then the whole page is used. Mark Brown is the final illustrator I was going to talk about today. I particularly love his artwork. It has this cartoon feel to it, a lot of color, but he likes to outline everything in black. And he's famous for his Arthur books and TV show. So here's another Arthur book. He is an illustrator and an author, but sometimes he's just the illustrator. So here are some books where he's just done the pictures while someone else has done the text. And he has a softness to him, but also he has some strong lines too. So I like the detail that he uses within the colors. If you notice, within these colors, there's